Hey, good morning, everyone. Joshua Severe Weather. Happy Monday to you. Things getting very busy here in the tropics with multiple areas of potential development over the next week or so. Heat building into the central and eastern United States this week. It will be one of our hottest weeks in several summers for some, especially around the Great Lakes and interior Northeast. And we have some winter weather in parts of the Northwest here, a late season storm. So, a very rare situation where we've got much below on one part of the country, much above on the other. We'll take a look at the weather driving everything and also where severe weather may occur here in the next few days. But the majority of today's video is going to be focusing on the tropics, and that's where we're going to start things off. So appreciate you all joining me. A busy week in the tropics. We are starting to heat things up as expected for the second half of June. Not a named system yet, but that does look like it is going to be a pretty good likelihood here by the second half of this week. You can see my circulation here on this map. This is the Central American Gyre, CAG. This is a monsoon circulation that has formed around Central America, and what it's doing is promoting rising air in the atmosphere and lots of rain and lots of cloud cover. And there's a decent chance we get our first system, named system, out of this gyre here maybe even as soon as tomorrow or first thing on Wednesday. A tropical storm likely, the first name on the list, Alberto. And at the very least, it's going to bring heavy rainfall into Texas, moisture all the way up to the central Gulf Coast, and heavy rain into Mexico. And a lot of that area actually does need the rainfall, so this could end up being beneficial. We're going to keep an eye on and see how much room it actually has to develop, because right now it looks like kind of a very broad system that's going to take a little time to gather its circulation and to gather a well-defined area where winds can strengthen. The gyre sticks around into next week. We may have a second system to track, although the certainty level on that is not going to be quite as high. One thing that is for certain is that areas that are facing the Pacific of Central America and southern Mexico, which are in a drought, are going to be dealing with what looks like historic flooding on the order of feet. And unfortunately, we go from one extreme to the other. There's no transition here. This is monsoon season where we are dealing with incredible amounts of rain across this area. So definitely not going to be easy to travel through there. With mountainous areas as well, we are likely to see landslides, mudslides, and unfortunately, the potential for loss of life and property. Out in the rest of the Atlantic, things are pretty quiet, but we are going to see low pressure that may form here, taking aim at either northern Florida or the southeast coast towards the end of this week and over the weekend. This may not be fully tropical. It may actually have some subtropical characteristics to it. Looks like primarily just a smaller area of rain and maybe some locally strong wind, but higher surf if you are planning to head to the beaches here Friday or this weekend. That could impact you. At least will bring more cloud cover and maybe some moisture with it. Trends for this over the last few model runs that we've been looking at since this time yesterday are for it to be a little weaker and a little bit farther north than maybe what it looks like yesterday. But there's still some room for that to change, as this system probably won't even develop until we get to either Tuesday night or sometime on Wednesday. Here's a look at the broader view of the Atlantic Ocean. These are ocean water temperatures, and areas that have the best chance to see tropical development are basically sitting at 26, 27 degrees Celsius. That's about 80 Fahrenheit. So if we circle this area in here, we can see the area where something may potentially form would be in here. So nothing really in the subtropics or even for Bermuda at this time. But as we look closer into land, that's why we're seeing lots of stuff closer to land. The water temperatures are already running as high as 30 to 31 degrees Celsius. We're talking about 86, 87 degrees Fahrenheit, locally even higher than that. So water temperatures, not a problem for tropical development. You can see, in fact, we continue to run well above the average, some variation, but much of the Atlantic Basin is in the red. The white line indicates where we're neutral. There's really only one or two areas that are below the average for this time of the year, one being this, what we call Atlantic Nina. And it's right around the equator where water temperatures are a little bit cooler right along the equator. That does not, by the way, favor less storms. That has nothing to do with the main development region. If anything, it generates a bigger gradient in here, which means maybe even some more action once we get into July and August. The other area to watch is this area in here where water temperatures are a little bit below average. That can be attributed to a change in circulation where warm air comes down into here, which unfortunately is not a good look for the Gulf of Mexico or the Caribbean Sea at this point. We're going to talk more about that in coming videos. Here's a closer look at the Gulf. We remain above average. Water temperatures more common for August. And that is part of the reason we're seeing more action here, but not the entire part of it. Ocean heat content remains very high across the Caribbean Sea, across the main development region, and across the southeastern Gulf of Mexico. And if you're thinking, wow, that looks pretty active, you're right. Or not active, but pretty extreme, you're right. We see anomaly. That is where we are with respect to average, the anomaly, not the actual value, but running well above average right across this area here. So very warm waters, more common for the meat of the hurricane season that we typically experience here later in August and September. Does that mean we are going to see Category 5 hurricanes all June and July? Not necessarily. But it certainly means there is more deeper, warmer water to deal with once we do get a system. Now, interestingly, things have changed a little bit over the last week. We have seen a little bit of cooling with respect to average near Florida. A lot of that is due to the fact that we are seeing so much rain and cloud cover last week across Florida. Does it mean we're done with hurricane season? Of course not. It just means temporarily things have cooled down just a little bit and have stopped warming. But if you look farther east, you can see things are actually warming with respect to average. And if you look farther west, same deal here. So we are not seeing a significant drop off in the anomaly. It's just probably not warming up nearly as quickly as it was here in the spring, which is a good thing. The Earth has checks and balances. We don't just warm off the chart. That's that. We are going to see some of these variations here over time, which should be a bit assuring to you, by the way. But again, we've had hurricane seasons where water temperatures have been much cooler than they are apparently on record now, and we've still seen lots of storms. So there's more to it than just water temperature. Part of that is, do we have favorable rising air and divergence aloft? As air rises, thunderstorms grow and spread. What we want to typically see are more favorable conditions for storms to actually get going. And you can see here, these green colors indicate more favorable divergence. This is why we've got a gyre in here as we have air spreading out, allowing storms to grow and take up more real estate. So we actually have a couple of areas here that are somewhat favorable here for tropical development as we get through the second part of the month of June. Now, as we get into next week, we do see overall, the model says it's not unfavorable, but it's not as favorable by the weekend here. As we get into the very end of June, we see another area where it becomes more favorable again. I'm sorry if this is difficult to see, but see this area of green? We are starting to see what's probably going to be a more active period here where we've got waves that come across of Africa. And instead of getting sheared to death like they are right now, they're actually going to have a better chance of maybe growing into something. So as we get to the very end of June, we do need to start keeping an eye on things here. Typically, we don't till late July, but last year we had a couple of systems here. And this year, we're a little bit behind on the timeline, but we're still seeing that potential as we get into the end of the month of June. Over the Gulf of Mexico, there is still some favorable spreading aloft here, some divergence. So we are certainly not done with potential development here in about a week and a half. It just maybe isn't quite as favorable as it appears to be this week. As we get into early July, things aren't quite as favorable across the Atlantic Basin, but again, this could certainly change. This is just an ensemble mean, meaning there are different solutions which can favor different things this far out. And then as we get farther into the month of June, we will see in general some potentially better conditions here aloft for things to start get going here in the Gulf of Mexico. I'm going to learn to talk, I promise. Man, I do need more sleep. This is a busy time of year for a lot of us between family stuff and tropical season and work. Here's a look at El Nino, La Nina. We're pretty much sitting right around zero, so neutral conditions for now, but the trend will be for this number to continue to go downhill. How fast it does can dictate how busy the hurricane season gets, but the number of storms and the intensity of storms doesn't completely rely on this one number. There are a lot of factors in play, but typically speaking, as it drops, and as we head to La Nina, which is this line right here, we typically see more action in the Atlantic, less action across the Pacific due to the fact that we have lower amounts of wind shear. So let's take a look at what's going on today. Two areas of immediate concern. One has a pretty good chance of developing into a tropical system, probably a depression, maybe even a lower end tropical storm somewhere in the southwestern or western Gulf of Mexico. There's another area that may develop here in a couple of days east of the Bahamas. The general trend has been to shift it a little bit farther north. This one still has uncertainty with it, but there is a chance it could try to spin up into something here east of Florida. The water is warm, so we are obviously going to track it until it dies or makes landfall, depending on what happens here. Beyond that, we may see a second system in the Western Gulf. We'll look at that here in a little bit. We are going to see Atlantic hurricane hunters flying into this first area here this afternoon. You can see 18Z is when it'll be in there investigating. That is 1 o'clock Central this afternoon, 2 Eastern time. It's going to take about a 3-hour flight through this system to see if it's developing a circulation, if it in fact has winds strong enough to classify it as a tropical cyclone, and also to take some measurements of what's going on, at least in the lower 10,000 feet of the atmosphere. It's not going to get higher than that to see what's going on and model what the upper atmosphere looks like, but it's going to take a look at the lower part of the circulation to see if in fact it is a legitimate tropical cyclone, or if not, if it's getting close. We are likely going to see 2 more flights going in after that, starting tomorrow morning. So after this flight leaves this afternoon, we're not going to get any new data from hurricane hunters until we get to tomorrow morning around 7:30 a.m. So about the time I'll have my next video out. And then another fix expected after that in the afternoon. So about every 6 to 12 hours, we'll have a plane going in. So these will be 6 hourly fixes. 1 flight today and at minimum 2 flights tomorrow, maybe 3. There's also the possibility that they'll fly east of the Bahamas to see if a low pressure has formed into that area east of Florida. That would not happen, though, until tomorrow afternoon at the earliest. So here's a look at the tropics on our satellite. This is infrared. You can see most of the activity centered here over Central America and the Gulf of Mexico. We've got this front that is dropping down through the Bahamas. We're watching the tail end of it for a circulation to try to form. We do see waves coming across Africa here, nothing of immediate concern at this point. And then you can see in the north central states, we have another wave of intense storms with heavy rain and severe weather focused right now on Minnesota, Iowa, and eastern South Dakota. And a remnant system which brought some surprise weather, not surprise, but it was under forecast for the Great Lakes region, Chicagoland into southwest Michigan yesterday afternoon, evening. We actually had some injuries from those storms. Lots of people are out this time of the year, and storms, unfortunately, can affect that safety of folks. Here's the Gulf. Again, you can see a very broad circulation, but nothing closed off. The area that has a chance of developing in the Gulf is still over land in here, but it is expected to emerge as we get into the afternoon. That's why they're not flying until this afternoon. But we're going to watch this area here to see if there is, in fact, a low-level circulation. There's a lot of mid-level and upper-level energy that is producing rain all the way up into Louisiana and the central Gulf Coast region. That started yesterday morning, by the way. And you can see there are weak circulations embedded within this, but nothing organized. So what the plane is going to do is it's going to take a look at this entire area and determine if, in fact, we have 1 circulation or 3 circulations or just 1 broader circulation, because until we really get a tighter circulation, we're not going to really see development. We're just going to see lots of rain and cloud cover. Here's a look at the Caribbean, and you can see moisture from this gyre extends into the Western Caribbean. Let me get my pen back out. Lots of rain that will be affecting the Cayman Islands all the way down to just west of Jamaica. We are staying pretty dry across this box in here, especially the eastern part of it, other than some typical pop-up storms. We're not really seeing anything that looks like it'll be threatening anytime soon. We've got a lot of kind of northwesterly flow aloft, which is certainly not going to be favorable for anything to form across the Caribbean, at least over the next week. And then across the Atlantic, we've got our boundary that has moved south and east of Bermuda, which is right here. But there is a very weak circulation here and another very weak circulation here, rounding the base of our upper level trough. So the models are trying to pick up on one of these 2 things consolidating and heading in this direction, maybe even turning more northwesterly around the ridge of high pressure. But right now, nothing has formed just yet. So what we're doing is we're looking at something that could form and make landfall in a day or 2 once it forms, but it hasn't formed just yet. And that is the challenging portion of our tropical meteorology is trying to figure out what's going to pop up and how much time it's got over water and how strong it can get. The Central Atlantic is in pretty good shape. We don't see anything of concern. Same goes for the Eastern Atlantic, a lot of stable air. We do have waves coming through Africa, but they are staying south of 10 degrees north, which means they're unlikely to develop tropically. Here's the upper level pattern. This is at about 20 to 30,000 feet. We take a look here at where our high pressure systems are and where our troughs are, and this is heading into tomorrow, and you can see a building ridge of high pressure across the northeast, keeping things very hot. This big heat dome is in place, keeping things out of the northeastern Gulf. We also see our circulation here over Central America, with one piece of it right here off the Texas coast. This is Texas right here. Another piece on the Pacific side sitting over Central America, driving that moisture inland. And then we may see a second piece down in here. So a big, broad circulation with some embedded circulations within it. Here is our trough and our leftover front. You can see low pressure aloft starting to form here. That is generally going to go underneath this high pressure zone. Now, as we move this along in time, you will see this high pressure area over the northeast actually lifts northward and allows an opening for something to move west towards Florida. But over the last couple of model runs, we're seeing more of a northerly trend, moving away from Florida and heading more towards the Carolinas here on Friday. The reason why our ridge of high pressure here is kind of weakening a little bit quicker than maybe models showed the other day. And what that does is it allows an avenue for something down here to try to gain some latitude and maybe aim towards the Carolinas. So that is one thing to watch here. Our gyre does weaken some over the weekend. I shouldn't say it weakens. It actually shifts back towards Mexico and the Pacific side of things. But interestingly, as we head back beyond this weekend into next week, we see it beginning to lift back into the Gulf of Mexico. What this means is we've got more areas to keep an eye on for development here in about a week or so. So things are not going to just quit after this first system comes into Mexico and Texas. We may see a second one after that. And looking at the GFS model, at that point, we're timing ridges and troughs to see when it's going to have an opening to maybe move northward. Right now, we don't know exactly how that's going to play out. So we like to look at ensembles to see where that development can be. We have a good chance of seeing that in the Western Gulf here, as you can see on this European ensemble forecast. Pretty good chance of a depression here. This is Wednesday, a couple days from today. A lower chance here east of the Bahamas at this point, although a better chance as we get towards Thursday. So if we see development east of Florida, it's going to be on Thursday. This system here is going to be heading towards land at that point. And then as we get to Friday, we no longer have a system in the Western Gulf. It's inland and it's weakened, but we do have the gyre recirculating here on Friday. This area east of Florida is fading fast, it looks like. So it is very possible we see a system that weakens before it tries to move inland, but the moisture's still going to be there. It's not going to be completely gone. It just may weaken at that point. And then as we head into next week, we can see here Sunday and Monday, about a week from today, another opportunity for something to try to form. And this one looks like it's got an opportunity to come into the Gulf a little bit farther north and east than our first system. I don't really think we're going to see development down here other than monsoon storms over the Southwest Caribbean, but we'll keep an eye on that for you guys. Here's a look at our tropical guidance here. Generally speaking, the system is going to move westward or northwestward into Mexico. Couple solutions trying to bring it up into South Texas here. The time frame on this is going to be Thursday evening. And then as we move on in time, we see another potential system forming and generally speaking moving northwestward. This is Sunday next weekend, and then Monday and Tuesday, and a lot more spread in our guidance. But generally speaking, the trend is a little bit farther north and east. Now, the good news here is that we don't see any solutions that look too entirely strong. As warm as the water is, we've still got other factors in play here that are going to keep it from getting too strong. And the biggest factor is that the circulation is going to be so broad that it's going to be very difficult to get something to concentrate into a well-organized system. Now, there is a chance, but it's very unlikely we see a hurricane in the Gulf this time of the year. We're just a little too early for that to happen. So don't treat it like it can't happen. It just isn't very likely at this point. Here's a look at our Atlantic feature, and very weak on here. You can see, generally speaking, a west to west northwesterly track. This is going to be Thursday evening. The big difference today from yesterday is that we have fewer tracks going into Florida, more tracks that are avoiding Florida to the north and east, all of them fairly weak at this point. And by the weekend, the system is going to fade. It may be a weak circulation over the Carolinas, or it may actually be inland over Georgia and Alabama and pretty much gone at that point. So it's out there, but it may scoop up a quick name, but it is going to be much less impactful than what we're seeing here in the Gulf. Here's a look at the European model real quick. A lot of you have returned and saw this a couple days ago. Not a whole lot has changed, but big area of cloud cover and moisture here, low pressure here tomorrow night into Wednesday in the Western Gulf. And then we see a little bit of a reprieve, and then we see another piece of energy forming here in about a week in the Western Gulf. The European isn't really latching on to it like some of the other models, but it is showing more cloud cover. The Canadian is showing that, by the way. Canadian's not always the best model to look at, but sometimes it gets things right, so we need to look at it anyway. But here's the Western Gulf taking low pressure up into northeast Mexico, moisture into South Texas. This would be Thursday morning. You can see it's got our weaker feature here, actually aiming more towards Wilmington and Myrtle Beach here. Time frame on that would be Friday night, early on Saturday. Then the Canadian generates another storm system as soon as Friday night, Saturday morning. This could be a little bit too aggressive, by the way, but it does show something else forming here and in the Western Gulf during the first half of next week. Finally, the GFS model, I don't really trust it after 10 days, but we can look just so you guys can get an idea of what it's showing. But you can see the GFS is struggling on the development of this system because it has a circulation here, but it also has one all the way up here and a third one back in here. So it's struggling to resolve where our actual storm is going to form because it's got so many players on the map. And it actually, in my opinion, gives us a little bit too much out of this system, probably too intense with this system here in the Atlantic, because this is going to be tomorrow night and it's just not developing that quickly. As we move the time along here, you see that GFS, because it's stronger with this system, pulls it farther north towards North Carolina. I'm not saying that's not possible, but right now it is an outlier. It's probably more likely a weaker feature, more aimed towards Georgia and maybe South Carolina and Northeast Florida here on Friday. But whatever happens here, it doesn't grow in size. It's kind of a weak circulation, maybe a depression or subtropical storm. And then by the end of the weekend, it's pretty much fading at that point. Here's our next feature in the Gulf here. This is Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. Again, the GFS struggles. It's got multiple circulations. It tries to kill the initial one and form it and then bring it up into Texas. And I've seen all kinds of wacky stuff here. The run before, by the way, tried to show something that was generating. Whoops, had to slow it a minute ago. Had something generating to the east of it and heading into Florida. This model is just struggling with what's going to happen, so we just really can't trust it beyond about a week or so. So that's a look at what we're looking at. If we look at wind speeds here, you will see that it's going to be windy in the Western Gulf across our oil rigs and platforms. Wind gusts 40 to maybe 45 miles per hour, well to the north of whatever generates here. And that continues into Wednesday night. The winds do relax on Thursday, but they may try to pick back up here in the Gulf next week, depending on what tries to form. So we're going to have to keep an eye on wind. Again, not as big a story as the rainfall. Here is a look at the rain. And you can see very wet in the northwestern Gulf, drier across Florida and over Georgia and Alabama. But rain totals in the next 10 days as much as 3 feet here around the Pacific coast, especially El Salvador, but also Guatemala, southwest Honduras, far northwestern Costa Rica, and far southern portions of Mexico. And that would be very bad. Pretty dry over the Bahamas, eastern Cuba, Jamaica, and Hispaniola, relatively speaking. And pretty dry here across the islands as well. We do see on the windward side maybe a few inches of rain. On the leeward side, not much at all to speak about here. Pretty dry pattern. The GFS model is even wetter than the European, not surprisingly, but kind of highlights the same areas as getting quite a bit of rain here with the potential over the waters of the Pacific to see 5 feet of rain. Can you even imagine that? But even 2 to 3 feet of rain here and over a foot in this one narrow band that affects the middle coast of Texas. All right, that's what I was going to do. Sorry about that. Here's the rainfall forecast, averaging all of our models together over the next 10 days. We see that the areas that don't really need the rain are going to get it. The areas that do need the rain aren't going to see a lot. This can vary quite a bit, but generally speaking, Florida, pretty seasonable amounts of rain. Above average, though, from Mobile on westward towards Texas. Now, there is a potential to see some heavier rain here in Florida, but probably not until we get to next week. The system that comes out of the Atlantic doesn't look like it's going to do a whole lot, so we're going to probably have to wait another week here to see much across northeastern Florida. The Gulf, on the other hand, the western half of it is very active here. We see significant amounts of rain aimed at Texas, but also Louisiana. Some of that moisture tries to make it all the way up to places like Lubbock and Midland, Odessa, believe it or not. Here's a look at what our model is showing, or what our average models are showing. And most of this rain is going to come Wednesday and Thursday. We see totals that have the potential to get over 5 inches in Houston, over 7 inches in Victoria, and maybe close to a foot somewhere here on Padre Island or down towards Brownsville. So a lot of rain is in fact coming, and it's going to come in multiple waves. Farther up the Texas coast, we saw some rain yesterday. Generally speaking, these model blends are a little bit lower for Houston and Galveston, but still significant, as we see the potential for 4 to 6 inches of rain, higher amounts farther down the coast. Austin, Texas, about 4 inches. San Antonio, about 5. Louisiana has already been getting pretty wet. We may see locally 2 to 3 inches of rain today alone. Let me zip this down for you guys to see everything. But generally speaking, 2 inches or more south of I-10, maybe 6 inches near the coast. Significant rain as well across coastal Mississippi and Alabama. Here's another look at Mississippi and Alabama for you guys. And again, the areas that really need the rain aren't going to see that much of it. When we get down to the Gulf, we do see some significant totals. Florida is not going to be as wet this week, so that big area of high pressure building into the east will actually bring down some subsidence, some sinking of the air for a few more days. We will see some typical easterly flows, so some showers aimed at Palm Beach and Port St. Lucie, but nothing like what we had last week. The flow is totally different. Last week, that flow was out of the southwest. It came across all of the Gulf into Florida. Today, it's going to be out of the east. Meaning we've got less moisture than what we had, but it could still rain pretty hard on the East Coast here. As we get to next week, though, whatever pops up in the Gulf does need to be watched. You can see we start to get more of a southerly or even southwesterly flow, according to some of our model guidance, by next week. And as a result, we could see some more significant rainfall coming over the weekend into next week in Florida, probably starting on Sunday, to be honest with you guys. Now, keeping an eye on this feature here off the East Coast, it does drive some moisture inland here Friday into early Saturday, but it isn't a lot. It will break the heat a little bit. It'll bring more cloud cover, but generally speaking, we're not looking at a big rainfall here across the Piedmont area at all. More at the coast, but again, right now it's not looking like a huge rainmaker at this point. If anything, we get more rain in the mountains than we get anywhere else as this moisture eventually gets wrung out there. So if you are planning a mountain vacation, do expect to see some heavier rain over western North Carolina, all the way up into the mountains of Virginia, West Virginia, and eastern Kentucky. But coastal sections are not going to see a lot of rain out of this unless something changes. The rest of the U.S. is actually not going to be all that bad here. The west cools off a little bit for a few more days. Our big weather is going to be up here across the upper Midwest. We have some flood potential in here. This is the remnant circulation that came through Illinois yesterday. It's still going here in Michigan. Keep an eye on things today in southwest Ontario, but this should lift away and not be an impact for the rest of the Northeast. And here you can see our trough digging down here, pulling moisture up into the deep south here across Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, western Florida. And that is going to circulate back to the west here. Big trough in the northwest. We're seeing cold air aloft, producing some mountain snow here today and tomorrow over parts of Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana. Our last days of astronomical spring here, and we're certainly milking them for significant amounts of snow. And you can see on our hazards map, it is very colorful, from winter storm watches and warnings here in Montana and Idaho to a flood watch in Minnesota to a severe thunderstorm watch in southern Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa, to heat advisories, watches, and warnings from the Great Lakes on east into New England. Red flag conditions as well in the Four Corners, as fire dangers are going to be increasing. Today's threat for severe weather is in the upper Midwest and especially in the plains. I do think we might see an upgrade coming here in the western Dakotas and Nebraska with an increased chance for tornadoes. Not so much wind, but also large hail. So maybe an enhanced region coming here later today. And this area has just been getting battered over the last couple of weeks. Tomorrow it shifts east, more of a linear front. We see that threat all the way into northwest Ontario. Wednesday, for now, we don't have any areas highlighted for severe weather. I think they may actually occur in Canada and maybe Michigan. And then beyond that, not quite so busy, but still, we're going to see quite a bit of weather in the northern U.S. As we look towards Thursday and Friday, our front stays stuck over here. We've got another piece of energy this weekend which I think will trigger more severe weather around the Great Lakes and upper Midwest. And we'll have to keep an eye on that in the Northeast for Sunday and Sunday evening, but it'll plow through here pretty quickly. And then we have to keep an eye on the Great Lakes, upper Midwest, middle of next week. The wind flow does increase. This is still a ways off, but I do think at this point we may have some complexes of storms and a potential derecho to look at here. And you can see Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin are kind of in the thick of that here for next Tuesday. But that's some time off still, and we've got time to watch it. I appreciate y'all's time today. I hope you have a blessed Monday. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, please share with your friends. Please consider becoming a subscriber. And as always, I wish you all a safe day. Hope you have a blessed day. And I give all the glory to God who has given me this gift as a meteorologist to share things with you all and to get you prepared for what may come down the pipe. The great part about the weather is that it unifies people. It brings people of all faiths together, people of all interests. I know it did for me when I was super young. But I realized that God created the earth so that we could all get along and be good stewards. Whether or not we chose to believe in God or believe that Jesus is our Savior, what we could do is all come together to study the weather. And that's the cool part about this community. That's what I really enjoy. But what I enjoy more is the unity that comes with it and the opportunity to talk with other people that have a weather interest and to help them out and have them help me out so that I can grow and learn. And this is talked about in the Bible in many places. Proverbs 27:17, King James Version, iron sharpeneth iron, so a man sharpeneth the countenance of his friend. And the author of Psalm 133 says, behold, how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. And brethren, meaning men and women, not just men, but the opportunity for us all to come together in the face of natural disasters, in the face of extreme weather, and to help one another is what God brings us together for. It's not that he creates the weather to ruin everybody's lives, but what he wants to see are people coming together in the same place, working towards a common goal. And that's to share the love that he has for us with each other. So my encouragement, my word today is just to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. Reach out to somebody you haven't reached out to and just check on them and make sure they're doing all right, because God wants us all to get along. He doesn't want us to continue to do battle with each other, which unfortunately has been happening since the beginning of time. But anyway, I pray that you all have a safe day. I will talk with you again tomorrow morning, and I hope it's a good one. See you soon.